Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Williams, and I'm joined as always by my wonderful co-host, and I just love her to life, Sonia Madison.
The truth comes out. Welcome to 2025. How are you today?
I'm trying something different in 2025.
Hey, walk
We'll
in
see.
truth. Well, whatever you want to do
That's what we'll call it. Let's call it truth. Okay.
it.
Yeah. Trying to be nice. You'll
So
see
tell
if it
me,
lasts longer than the first month.
how did you spend your MLK holiday? I know we talked about it a little bit, but
My belief is that MLK Day is a day of service. And so we were open in the office and I saw patients.
so it was a day of pay.
Huh? It was a day of service. It was a day of service. And I also spent it boycotting the inauguration. There was a email or message going around. People were saying, watch anything but the inauguration. And I don't know how that panned out. I hadn't checked the Nielsen ratings or anything like that about how what the attendance or the viewership was. What about yourself?
No, I did not watch the inauguration. I participated in a march here, a lot of the
Oh,
civic organizations. So yeah, it was extremely cold because we actually got snow the next day as well, which is again, I'm always shocked to when we get little flurries around here. But I met a lot of new people, which was always good, and it reminded me of, see, this is why you got to stay off social media sometimes. We're missing that one-on-one engagement. You know, these
exactly.
interactions. So yeah, it was a really nice day.
Well, it was cold all over the place. Somebody said it was a cold day in hell when Trump got inaugurated on MLK Day.
So we're in hell. Is
They
that how
said
we're
hell froze
characterizing
over. Hell froze over. It's probably feeling like a little bit of hell this week though. But
it?
anyway, it's been cool. It's I my we've never taken off for Martin Luther King Day in my practice, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. We do take off Juneteenth.
You are the owner and CEO, right? Or
I know.
I just want to make sure.
Listen, we got to make that money, girl. Got to make that money.
You
Days
can make
off.
a change, right? You can make a change.
Yeah, it'd be closing the doors. That one day a year is
One
gonna
day is gonna
make a
close
day,
those
make or
doors.
break us. And now we got
I think that's
Juneteenth, two
I think
days.
I think that's part of the consumption problem we talked about last year, that we have a consumption problem, not necessarily.
Yes,
I mean, we do have obviously the inflation problem, but some of that is we're consuming whether we have the money or not. So,
this is true, and I'm stopping that for one. So I'll only consume that which I have the money to afford to get. So that's why I go moonlighting in places like Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the dead of winter. I can't stand the cold, but
well, we have to tell our listeners that your children are grown, so they're not missing out any
then
parental
I miss it.
responsibilities that
The only
you.
one that's missing something is my wife, who's missing the pleasure of my company these days.
If
And
only we could now pan to her having parties.
my wife loves me. It's been 31 years. Her heart is growing even fonder as we speak.
You're speaking of your practice. I read somewhere that enrollment of Black students in medical school have declined. What are your thoughts on that? Because I mean, I imagine you have a succession planning as well as while you're busting on these hours. But what do you
You,
think about?
you, I think the most important question would be what was the number of applicants? Because when you start looking at the number of enrollments and that's declining, I don't think that it has, and the number of applications aren't, I don't think that it has a whole lot to do with the lack of interest in pursuing medicine as a career as it does with this advancement of the whole idea of the diversity is not important. And so as schools start pulling away from the notion of or the benefit of diversity, then I think less minorities will get attention for favorable enrollment. It's not that they're not qualified, they're certainly as qualified, but the issue is that people just don't pay attention to them and still don't give them a seat at the table if they don't see their presence as adding value. It's interesting. I watched the video the other day about Joe Biden. They said y'all was sleeping on Joe. Joe appointed 39 black women to federal benches, judge seats, and to the Supreme Court. 39 black women. every one of them qualified.
Yeah,
Every one of them, huh?
more than qualified,
Yeah,
especially
every one of them
you
more
look
than
at
qualified.
Ketanji Brown Jackson next to Amy Coney Barrett. I
Yeah.
think the qualifications are astounding.
So the question
One
is,
versus the other.
is why hasn't that happened before? It's not that they weren't. I watched one commentator. He said, "Well, I guess they just need to work harder." Like, come on, dude, really? Because I think one of the black commentaries pundits was saying, of the all the Fortune 500 companies, there are only two black CEOs. Why is that? Does that mean that there's just not enough black administrators that are capable of running these companies? Of course, it doesn't mean that, because there are plenty of extremely competent black candidates who probably have applied for these positions and probably were more qualified for these positions than some of their white male counterparts who was awarded the position. And so, this whole notion of diversity, DEI being synonymous with lowering a standard, that's just fabrication. That's just fiction, because they realized that the standard had already been lowered by race from the beginning, because we're like, okay, we know that you're not the best candidate, Mr. White Man, but we're going to give it to you because the better candidate is a black man or
Well,
black
we have
woman.
to be honest when it comes to legacy applications. I mean, not only are you accepting people that have had pretty much a hand by hand next to someone and observed and has gathered a lot of information and has made networks and connections and whatnot. And oftentimes who you know, it means politics and everywhere, who you know gets you a lot further than what you know. And so we see that over and over. And if you're going to get rid of DEI, get rid of legacy, and we'll also see probably a lot of white applicants drop off. But even beyond just the fact that, hey, you're not then seeking out, or you're not giving people an opportunity who are again qualified and have been marginalized. I'd imagine in the healthcare field that also hurts marginalized communities, not just because, hey, they don't see themselves, but also because I'd imagine historically there has been this, and again, stereotype, we know this rooted in racism, that black bodies are less competent than white bodies. And you saw it even in the NFL, in the legal, when they were given better pension and retirement benefits to white athletes, saying, well, their cognitive or their mental was already superior to those of black athletes, and so their cognitive is worth more. And obviously that a lawsuit ensued, and we've fixed things, but that again was based on health professionals who again was rooted in their racism. And so if you do not have not only that face of seeing someone that does what you seek to do, but you also don't have someone in the room dispelling a lot of these stereotypes that are rooted in racism, and have people advocating for you, because we've talked about black maternal deaths, and so many other things that does not get looked at or does not get researched. Even when we had the dermatologists on here, do you really see a lot of white dermatologists looking into black women hair? I mean, it really, so it hurts us even in that. I don't know if you see that in your profession or not, but it's more than just the fact that, hey, we're not sitting at the table. It's also, hey, then it hurts our community.
Unconscious bias is real. There's a unconscious bias in medicine where black people probably may not. Actually, there have been studies, I think, where black patients receive significantly less pain medication than their white counterparts for the same conditions. And part of that is that unconscious bias, believing that the black person is faking. You know,
Or
so
even
there are,
equipped to handle
yeah,
such pain over over the white person.
but I don't know that anybody actually contemplates that consciously, but it's that unconscious bias that does impact it. Uh, I know, and I probably do a conscious bias myself. Is that when I have black patients in my office, I'm taking the extra step to educate them as well. I educate all my patients, but I make sure that my black patients understand because I know that when they go to their white doctors are not telling them the things that they need to know. Now, that being said, white doctors might not be telling white patients what they need to know as well. So I do educate everybody, but I'm conscious about it when I have my black patients. So if I'm talking to somebody about obstructive sleep apnea, for example, I want black people to know if it's not treated, it can cause problems with high blood pressure and eventually congestive heart failure. And so, our race is already predisposed to both of those things. So you need to understand that something as simple as what you would consider benign snoring may not be so benign. It can have important long-term consequences for you if we don't get it diagnosed and treated. And so I do actually think that it's important to have that. And one thing I didn't mention before about the enrollment. Now, when you talk about black student enrollment, you have to look at it compared to what? Now, in 2021, black student enrollment in medical school and medical college was at an all-time high. And so, yes, it dropped down in 2022. It dropped down even further in 23, 24 in that enrollment class. I don't know what the 24, 25 enrollment class was like, but we did have some drops in it. But still, nonetheless, it's still about 10% of all medical students are black. And when you think about 13% of the population being black, I don't think we're doing too bad. Can we do better? Absolutely, we should do better. And I was looking at some other statistic just the other day about the number of black students, the percentage of blacks who obtain associates, bachelors, masters, and then doctoral degrees. And I was actually quite surprised to find out that blacks beat out Asians for bachelors and masters and associates for
That is
that
that by
matter.
the percentage or just the numbers?
The percentage,
Okay, because
percentage, yeah,
percentage wise, they could still beat out us. I mean, it's kind of like the more
yeah,
black people on welfare. No, we're not. Now you want to argue a percentage, and that's what you want to argue, but it's not more black people on welfare.
right, right. So they looked at the of all of the people who obtained these degrees, what percentage of those were black, what percentage were white. Whites typically is hung out right around the 60 some odd percent range. And most of those categories, blacks were about 10% still. And Asians were more like 8, 9%. And I apologize if I'm not quoting the exact numbers until you got to the doctorate level, and then there were more Asians in the doctorate. Now, were you aware that the one immigrant population that has the highest percentage of doctorates in the United States? Guess where they're from?
Oh, I don't.
Nigeria.
Okay.
Nigeria. Nigeria. So these people come from these s-hole countries called
According to Trump.
Nigeria are the ones that you say you want to be able to have here. These high earning and very talented physicians. These people who are motivated to get their doctoral degrees more than any other immigrant that is coming to the United States and obtain the doctorates. Nigerians far out competes all of them. And guess what? They came from one of those black countries. So this is, that's one of the things that bothers me about, the executive orders that Trump passed this past week. And I know we want to talk about some of those, but this whole DEI initiative revoked one of the executive orders he wrote this week was to revoke all DEI programs within the federal systems. And to end what he called critical race theory. So any type of racial sensitivity training, gone from the military, gone from any federal agent hiring practices from any federal agency. Frankly, nobody's being hired in any
I was going to
federal
say
agency
it
right
even
now. So,
extends to enforcement because they've reduced the EEOC's power. They reduced a lot of, again, people who are in the system claiming discrimination. A lot of those claims are now probably not going to be investigated or not going to be looked into.
yeah, I'm really kind of. I have a relative who's also one of your relatives who actually who voted for Trump and who's he's a diehard. He loves everything that Trump is doing, and he makes a comment. He said, "Well, I've never been a fan of DEI anyway." And I'm sitting there thinking, like, you listen to too much TikTok.
I was gonna
That's
say,
right. You've been
is this
watching
another
too many
Clarence Thomas
X.
wannabe?
You've been watching too many X tweets because you don't. It's like I think that the job should go to the best qualified person. Well, the problem is that you don't qualifications. First of all, go beyond what your score is on a test. It goes beyond what your degree is. Now we can still have the same score. We can have the same degrees. We got similar experiences in terms of professional experiences, job experience. One of us black, one of us white. Who are you going to choose? Well, what is the white person going to do? He's going to bring more of what you already know, what your culture already has at that institution. Corporations have found that adding diversity to their workforce improves their productivities. It brings diversity of thought because you've got different cultural experiences and different perspectives that really benefit that corporation overall. So that's why a lot of corporations, even though I know there's this huge push from the right to get rid of DEI initiatives within corporations, many of them find that they still help their bottom line, and that once they do actually hire people of diverse backgrounds, they're like, man, this was the best thing I could have done. I'm so glad that we did this. And they might have thought that they were doing it out of some magnanimity or some charitable contribution that they were doing, but the reality of it is that they benefit from it if they continue to prioritize it. And unfortunately, I bet you what will likely wind up happening is that Donald Trump will start trying to pressure a lot of corporations to abandon their DEI initiatives. And you have to ask yourself why.
Well, they're already doing that. I mean, as soon as that Supreme Court decision came back, it was a lot of corporations getting rid of their DEI programs. I do want to add, first and foremost, women benefit the most out of DEI affirmative action programs, period, in discussion. And so I know a
We
lot
got
of
to
people
stop
like to
that.
put, whatever. I know a lot of people like to put it on, oh, it's just helping Black people. No, no, no. Women, particularly white women, benefit the most out of these programs. But also on the underlying that, who to me is saying that the best qualified person still isn't getting accepted? If anything, I mean, to me, looking at Trump's administration off top, I mean, we could talk about this Secretary of Defense who just got in. He was not, by any standards, the best qualified. You can even look at Trump. If I put Trump and
He's a
Hillary's
DEI
resumes
hire.
together, if I put Trump and Hillary's resumes together, then you should not have been a Trump supporter, as far as I'm concerned, because the best qualified candidate was Hillary at the time. And so to me, that to me is your way of saying, hey, I don't think Black people are better. And that to me is the
Or
only
as good.
or as fine or as good or best
Yeah.
qualified, whatever. That to me is your way of saying that. And to have particularly a Black person say that, it makes me wonder, do you have some self-hatred here? I mean, because that really does. I mean, because again, you look at Trump's presidency, look at even when he put in Betsy DeVos on his first term as Secretary of Education. I mean, no qualifications whatsoever in the education department, but we're going to throw her into this role. Look at Robert Kennedy Jr., who's now going to be up for Department of Health and Human Services. Where is the best qualified candidate in that? you know? And so that's why, I mean, don't let me get started, but that to me is just your way of saying, hey, I just don't think Black people should be considered for top positions.
Yeah. And it's not even, I don't think that it's so much that they don't think that we're as good or better. Problem is that they realize that we are, and that the more opportunity we get, the less opportunity is available for them. And that's the way that it's perceived, I think. And when you've lived a life of for generations always being the preferred, and now somebody else is the preferred, there's a problem with that. And I understand it. I get it. I get it. I would have the same type of pushback to say if every
You would be
time
the same, similarly selfish instead of encouraging
I
your
would
kids
now,
to be
now
better. You're
let me
just
say
gonna be
let me say
selfish.
I would feel the same way. I would feel the same way. I don't know that I would take the same actions to try to prevent other people from having opportunity. That's pretty selfish, I think. But yeah, I can understand. I would empathize with what they're going through right now, and I get it. You know, when you're having a hard time, getting advancements and everything, and you see other people of other races getting them, it's easy to go back and say, hey, that person just got it because of the color of their skin. No, they got it because they brought the same thing that you brought to the
Say, if
table,
anything, they get
plus.
despite the color of their skin. Because again, you do have to work extra hard to get noticed because you are fighting that presumption that you should not be there.
Yeah. So DEI gone in the federal government. We'll see what happens with that. Um, he wrote an executive order releasing the JFK and Martin Luther King shooting files. What do you think about that?
Well, I read somewhere, and definitely if this is wrong, please correct me. I read somewhere that his MLK's family wanted or is happy with that, but also want more, in terms of the release of those files. To me, it didn't surprise me because again, his whole platform is built on conspiracies, and so I don't doubt that there are people in the Project 2025 universe that would like to get that stuff information released. It really is, I mean, these first few days has really been a chapter one of the Project 2025 playbook.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me, that's public information. I unless I know what's in there, and this is probably my attorney hat talking, unless I can see what's in there, I don't have a problem with releasing the information.
Well, I'm curious as to why they haven't been released up until this point. Period. You know
I
what
guess we'll find out.
it does. It does actually. It basically fuse conspiracy theories, and I think sometimes just having some openness and sometimes I understand that some information you need to keep private, but the whole notion that the FBI was involved with the shooting of MLK.
It's
Um,
been a conspiracy theory for years, all right.
yeah, but if the files come out and shows it, then what? It will no
I'll say
longer be
until
a
we read it,
conspiracy theory.
because the files could come out and then people may still say, I don't believe it. They were fabricated. I mean, sometimes, trying to follow a conspiracy is only going to lead to more questions and more doubt.
Yeah. Now you sick about the access and the veracity of information that we receive now. Oh my gosh, I'm rubbing off on you.
Well, what did you think about
Like
the pardon?
soot. The pardons? Oh,
Of
January
all of the
6th.
January 6th pardons, let's see, let's be specific. Everyone, which I think was close to what, 1,500 to 2,000 people, everyone
Right.
is pardoned.
Silly. Just silly.
Not injustice, not appalled, but just silly. It's just silly.
Just silly. That's what it boils down to. And some of it, I'd like to think more. I'd like to think that it was just silly, but part of me makes me think that it's all preparation for rising uh, law enforcement. Period. It's the one step. Basically, he knows that if he gets militants to go up, he just basically gave a rubber stamp of approval to militants who fight on his behalf. And if he gets now with Hexaf now over the Department of Defense, and he's getting rid of all these generals and other people who don't follow his command or who don't agree with him politically or who might have spoken out against him. And he's replacing everybody with yes men. And my biggest fear is that the military will be turned against civilians, and those will be civilians who try to defend themselves either against militias that are in favor of Donald Trump or the military itself. The whole piece of moving the military down at the border, people say that's more of a symbolic thing. Yeah, it's a symbolic thing. It's showing us how he doesn't mind putting involving the military in matters that should be local law enforcement, which is an unprecedented type of thing. But this is the way that democracies are taken over and turned into dictatorships. And he's laying the foundation for it right now. He's laying it by forgiving and pardoning, I'm sorry, all of these rioters, these insurrectionists, to say, hey, you got my back, I'm gonna have yours.
Well, I did read that the Fraternal Order of Police, who, from my understanding, supported Trump, is in outrage over the decision. And to your point, like I said, this is chapter two, I guess, of the Project 2025 playbook. And we've put in, or he's put in the Secretary of Defense, who, again, doesn't have any, or very limited, but I think no experience when it comes to leading such mass operation. He was a previous Fox News commentator, which that should tell you all you need to know about this person. Has
Don't
had
judge a person by their occupation now.
oh, not by their occupation,
Why? Yes.
or not by
Judge
the
him by
company they
judge by his alcoholic behavior and abusive tendencies. That's what the Senate should have done. But
but also I think he's there has some issues with women. He's got some very extreme issues when it comes to women in the military, but also I think his former sister-in-law came out and said that he abused his ex-wife. And so even Mitch McConnell, which says a lot, even Mitch McConnell voted him down. And so again,
Tippy Turtle,
what you
Tippy
said?
Turtle. I said Tippy Turtle. It
Yeah.
reminds me. I don't know if you know Tippy Turtle. Tippy Turtle was a little cartoon
Oh,
character
before my time,
in
sorry.
coloring books. But back then we used to use coloring books.
But like you said, I mean, he wants to be able to control the military. He wants to be able to use it to his own advantage, and pretty much blind loyalty. And he's putting in the people in the Secretary of Defense to do that. And so here we are.
Yeah, we have a guest who says they don't want equality. They
They
don't
want
want
equity.
equality, huh?
Do they want equity, or they just want to be considered at the bottom of the totem pole?
I'm saying that I think she's saying that the administration doesn't want
Oh,
equality.
okay. So no,
The
okay.
administration doesn't want equality, one way or the other, whether it's racial, gender equality, or anything else. So they've gotten rid of it. It's all going out the window, and we don't want. How dare women or people of color consider themselves to be equal with people of European descent?
I know.
And Donald Trump is going to bring that notion back and put us
Whether
back
we
in our
are more
place.
qualified or not, you will always be less than.
And
What
if
did
I
you
have
think
to
about?
take the military to do it, he'll do it.
This is one of the healthcare ones. What did you think about him getting rid of Obama's, lowering cost of insulin and all that kind of stuff? He even wiped that out.
That's crazy. My belief is this: there is Donald Trump is pro corporation, and granted, yeah, as long as big business corporations can stay afloat, he's good. I saw one gentleman, I forget who it was. He was CEO, some Fortune 500 company CEO, talking about short-term inflationary problems. Inflation is tolerable, and I heard him. And I said, "Oh, see, he's saying the quiet part out loud. This is what I've been saying as well. It's tolerable because the shareholders they can take a little bit of loss of profit if the long game is to keep employees doing what they do. Now, so many people have, with the gig economy, they've left the job force, or at least the corporate job force. And if they're still working a 9 to 5, they're not working a 6 to 10 in addition to it anymore. So what they've gotten there, if they are working at 6 to 10, they're doing it on their own. They're making money from Uber, and Lyft and doing other stuff like that. The gig economy, they're making money from TikTok videos and YouTube videos and social media. So that's how they're supplementing their income. So what does that leave? That still leaves a deficit of employment. Now you're going to do this mass deportation, and you're going to have even a greater deficit of employment. So, in order to get people back into their jobs, into the corporate jobs, you have to drive inflation up so that their gig money is not enough to sustain them. Not only do you have to drive inflation up, and this is to the point of reversing the Obamacare and the prescription reduction, you have to make healthcare a primary reason why people go back to work for corporations. And I can't tell you how many friends I have who said the only reason I'm working now is because I need health care. I need health insurance. I need health insurance. And that's exactly what these corporate CEOs like to hear. we know that if we can require you to the only way that you can get access to affordable health care is by working for the man, then why not exploit that? And I think that's what they're doing is let's get rid of all of these freebies that the prior administrations had put into place to help people actually survive on their own and become independent of corporations. And let's make them dependent on corporations again. And healthcare is one of the health insurance is one of the primary targets for it.
All while minding the fact that corporations are still trying to reduce their workforce. So yeah, come dependent on me, but I'm not going to hire you anyways because I still want a small workforce and I want to be able to send a lot of my workforce overseas. Uh,
But the small workforce. So what the goal is to eventually drive those people back to work where there's an abundance of workers. Now I don't know how they're going to get an abundance of workers when they're exporting, when they're deporting a whole bunch of people. Now, granted, and closing not just deporting, but
it's
closing the
called
door off.
AI.
Huh?
It's called AI.
AI. Yeah,
Because
this
I
is
mean that's
true.
what's going to start happening.
Yeah, yeah, this is
Automation
true.
is real. It's happening all over, but even the federal, because I think part of his executive order is also is reducing the federal workforce. I mean, he's got a hiring freeze on federal workers. He, like you say, he's already trying to get rid of a lot of the DEI programs that are federal organized. But I think a lot of them, again, part of Project 2025 was saying, hey, we need to reduce government spending, and we're going to do that by reducing the federal workforce. And so that's something else that's going to happen.
I saw a story just recently about a woman who really wanted to work for the VA. And she and her husband, they uprooted their whole family. They moved to Texas because she was supposed to start working at the VA administration. She really wanted to care for the veterans and excited about it. They sold their home. They moved their whole family there. She was supposed to start in 2 weeks. And then the hiring freeze came. And so they did not hire her. She and her family are now out in Texas. Now, they were very voracious Trump supporters. And I was like, I want to be sympathetic a little bit, but I'm like, that's kind of you got kind of get what you got,
Are they
what you asked
saying,
for.
well, we will take this hit because we know the greater good is with Trump, or is it now? Never mind.
The response was more so that, well, I think this was an unintended consequence.
All
And so
right.
I'm sure that if he knew that this was what was going on, that he would remedy it. No, he knows that this is what's going on. He just don't care about you. He doesn't care about you. He cares about money, okay?
All right.
Uh, there was a viewer said, you can't worry about the price of eggs when you pass out on the way to the store. And so people prioritizing, health insurance over the cost of things. And so they understand you have to be able to have health insurance. And that's one of the reasons why they work so hard to try to get rid of that Obamacare and try to de-enroll people from it. And so if you can't get rid of it, they've been hamstrung there just because they can't get rid of it without replacing it with a better product. Well, I guess you can, but it would be political suicide at that point. So now they're just doing a death by 1,000 cuts, just cut the prescription drug price reduction, cut some of the subsidies that they may have given for Obamacare. Death by 1,000 cuts is a little bit more tolerable and palatable than
Well, and
total
another reason
annihilation.
a lot of people often go to the federal government, at least, is the retirement benefits. And we know that to some degree, they're trying to get rid of Social Security benefits. And if you don't have those retirement benefits from either a company or the government, which, while the government is the biggest employer, at the same time, again, they're trying to reduce employment in that sector. And I don't doubt that, again, forcing companies, just like with healthcare, forcing companies to offer retirement benefits isn't going to work for you. That is going to be another problem that we're going to encounter going forward.
Yeah. So he also issued this AI action plan. Basically, he said he's going to review Biden's AI action plan. Yeah.
He don't know what
But
to do yet. So he's like, well, let me see what they did.
he was like, I got concepts of a plan right now. And so that's what we're looking at, concepts of it. But the reality is, I think, that's a key part right now. And so, yeah, we do still need to, I think the government needs to be tightly involved in and how to control AI, which I think is an act of futility because AI is already out of control. It is out of control. You are not going to reel this thing back in. Everybody's got an AI platform and AI option. Everybody's making videos about X, Y, or Z. I can't tell you how many videos I saw about either Kamala and Jill fighting or Kamala and her husband Doug fighting, at the funeral. It's just, it's out there and it's not coming back.
Now he's also getting rid of security clearance from Dr. Fauci and pretty much said, "Good luck, because I don't care what happens to you."
Oh, security details, details.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes, sorry, thanks for
details.
the correction. Yeah, as well as
John Bolton.
yeah, that better say Mike Pompeo, John, like, and I was listening to The View one day, which is rare because again, I've been really trying to get off these news, but Alyssa Farrow was getting on Biden for pardoning or preempting all his family, but then said, "But what about us at the January 6th?" It's like you can't have it both ways here. You can't criticize him for doing it, but then say, "But what about me?" Because now that you're in fear of your life. Um, but
That's
I
a
mean,
straight up gangster move, though.
I'd imagine as a healthcare professional, because I mean, I do correct me if I'm wrong, but I take it you do have respect for Dr. Fauci and what he tried to do. I mean, that again is pretty much saying, if you go against me, I am sending you to the wolves.
Gangster, straight up gangster, straight up gangster. And I mean, you might, some people do idolize and really appreciate that type of gangster move until it's done against them and their loved ones. John Bolton had already had a ticket on his head from the Iranian government. They had credible threats, attempted threats to kill him, and he just announced to Iranians to Iran, hey, here he is, come and get him. He's free, And so I think he wound up having to get their own security. I know Anthony Fauci had to get his own security detail. I can't imagine. I don't know how much money Anthony Fauci makes or how much he has or anything like that, but he's not super rich. Uh, and you don't get super rich from being, a government scientist. Now, granted, he owns many patents, and I don't doubt that actually contributes a lot to his income. But the cost of a security detail can be exorbitant, especially when you have to get it just from doing your job. Just for doing your job. This man has, since the 1980s, or maybe even before then, has dedicated his life to studying infectious diseases that impact Americans. He was very instrumental in the HIV, in discovering HIV and working for some of the treatments, understanding the process of everything. And this is the repayment that he gets for his life of service to his country. And to me, I think that is just, oh man, I would be flipping the bird at every government, every Republican I've ever seen. And for him to be able to maintain any semblance of decorum, to me, I think it's just remarkable. Um, but no, I would be highly upset if I had to get a security detail just because of some of the stuff that I'd be trying to find a way to get back. And I guess you can't do that when he's the president of the United States. So
At least
you get
not in
arrested for that.
Yeah. I mean, he went from being a highly decorated, well-revered, professional to now. And I imagine to some degree he may just decide, you know what, it's time for me to get out of America because there's
You can
no much
run, but you
more
can't
I can
hide. They'll
do.
find you in other countries.
Now, another thing is the birthright citizenship. He wants to get rid of the ability to be born here and considered an American citizen by virtue of your birth. We've already got at least one judge say that. Sorry, the Constitution has already addressed that. So your attempt to, remove that is unconstitutional. But again, what were your thoughts even on that?
I don't know. So I understand that they were talking about the language of that. It was saying any person who is natural, or I don't know the legal language of it or something like that, born citizen of the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. I don't know what that means, as legal
I will
language.
say legally, you are personally subject to jurisdiction of any state that you are physically in or that you have residence or citizenship in. So,
Yeah. So if
We're
you're
not
not,
going to leave it up to the states either to determine your birthright either. Again, you can't have it both ways. You can't, because when we're talking about, and I'm sorry, just so you know, when we're talking about your ability to sue someone, you are talking about the jurisdiction to be able to bring that suit in that state. And so say, if
okay.
I committed an infraction in Illinois, by virtue of committing that infraction in Illinois, I can then be subject to Illinois jurisdiction. But say I do nothing in Illinois, I'm here in Georgia. If someone tries to sue me in Illinois, I would argue Illinois has no jurisdiction over me unless you can show that I have, willfully either entered into a contract in Illinois or done something physically in Illinois. Then the argument would be Illinois has no jurisdiction to bring the suit.
But does a country or a state, any state, government have jurisdiction over someone who is illegally in their country?
But again, that's what I'm saying. With the birthright, you were born here. And so that's what the Constitution, which that's what we've seen over and over. If you're born here, and again, you're subject to jurisdiction here by virtue of you being personally there, then yeah, your citizenship is there. Well, obviously, what they're trying to argue is, oh, if you have, and I think this is part of what we talked about when we had Kia on, but this fruit of the, I guess, the crime. So you have people come here illegally, and then anything that comes from that should be then illegal. I think that's what they're trying to argue. But again, you're trying to change how we are interpreted the laws.
And he's got the right court, Supreme Court, to change how we interpret the laws. They've done it before. They're not afraid to do it again.
We shall see. Because I mean, there have been some times. Again, they tried to repeal Obamacare, and we had a Chief Justice say, no, no, no. The Congress can, put in a tax, which is essentially what then upheld it. And even with the immunity, again, while they said, hey, there is some immunity here, they didn't give a blanket, you're immune from everything. And had I think Jack Smith has came out, or some of them came out and said, hey, we're showing he would have been convicted and we had to play this thing out. So I mean, I don't disagree that the Supreme Court has done a lot for him, but I'm not 100% convinced, or at least I don't have no hope that they would just give him a blanket check to do anything he wants to do.
I don't. Do you know how many people of color will be eligible for deportation if birthright citizenship is revoked and if it's made retroactive?
I mean, can we start with what's this guy, Elon Musk? Can we get him?
But he's naturalized though, isn't
Elon
he?
Musk and all his children.
But I think he's natural. Yeah, I think he's naturalized. Is he naturalized? I think he is.
I mean, by that argument, so has everyone that's been born here, because again, the law has pretty much said, "Hey, you are born and naturalized here," and now we're trying to reverse that. And so, if we're going to reverse that, then hey, how far? What are we reversing? And I think that's why you have one judge said, "No, no, no, we're not doing that." And so, and I do agree that that should be something that Congress should do. That should not be something a president can just write an order and then say, now go, enforce what I'm saying. That's not how, again, either checks and balances are important in this democracy or
Yeah,
not.
yeah. So the government, I mean, so the Supreme Court, they can't write law, but they can interpret it. And so if they interpreted the law to mean as Donald Trump is suggesting, then it would be incumbent upon Congress to go back in and write an amendment or clarify the amendment and
And we know
two
that won't
thirds
happen.
vote,
It
two
won't
thirds in both houses, right?
happen.
And then does it? Then it has to be actually signed still by the president, I think.
Yeah, he does have to sign it into law.
And if he vetoes it, then it has to go back and pass again, I think,
Yeah, the
override
Congress
his
have to
veto.
have to override the veto. Which again is all that's not going to happen in 4 years. It's just not. But I also think that again, when the judge struck that down, one, as we even saw with the presidential immunity argument, even if that were to continue to go at the appellate process, it could probably be the next 3 or 4 years before they look at it. And then you might have a court that does exactly what they did in immunity and say, oh, did you look at this? Did you look at this? Well, if you didn't, I'm going to send it back to you to go look at that. And
Right.
then we wait to see what the next administration says. And if the next administration just vetoes the order, then it no longer becomes an issue, right? But I laugh, but that is unfortunate because again, that also shows that it is very difficult to really then make change even in the government.
Yeah. One thing I can say I appreciate about Donald Trump is
Oh
that
gosh.
he makes us really explore and interrogate the laws that are written and have to go back in and clarify those things. Those things where there was ambiguity before and people relied on the integrity of people holding the office to not exploit those. Um, he sort of got rid of that notion that you should be able to trust the integrity of your president to not exploit the laws to his benefit. And I like to think that it's still, again, some magnanimous effort that he did, but the reality is that he's testing it only because he wants to be able to
He's
obtain
a
the
convicted
power
felon.
that he.
But to me,
But
then you should appreciate Black people because that to me is the whole thing about
of
critical
course,
race
I like
theory.
appreciate black people.
No, because that's what I'm saying. Black people have challenged the laws over and over and over and over. And what you're saying, that appreciation from Trump, no, that to me is an appreciation of Black people. We would not really know as much or dive into as much as the enforceability or what these laws says if it wasn't for the civil rights movement, if it wasn't for even the back to slavery, when they were challenging Black people as property and how many Black people kept challenging that. And so that's why people may not critical race theory, but it's very important to look at that in law school, and they do, because then you see how various movements have challenged laws.
Well, I do appreciate black people. I do. I appreciate scientists too, who have gotten a raw deal during COVID. One of our guests said that scientists took a big hit during COVID, which brings us to the other EO they wrote, withdrawing us from the World Health Organization. I'm like, why would we do that? First of all, we had a pandemic preparedness plan that Obama put into place, and when you got in office, we don't need that. We don't need that. And guess what happened? A pandemic. And and because people actually predicted that a pandemic could happen, people who study this all their lives, epidemiologists who see patterns of travel, see patterns of outbreaks across the world, um, and pontificate on when it's actually going to impact us, not if, but when it will actually impact us. And so they make a plan together to say, okay, this is how we're going to handle it, and you just dismantle it, whatever. Well, we see how that worked out in 2020. Now that we're no longer in the World Health Organization, when pandemics break out in other countries, and they will, and it's not all just man made, some of them may be man made, I get that. But the reality is, from a more ontological perspective, um, when you're at the top of the food chain, which humans basically supposedly are, the bottom of the food chain is the one thing that can actually take you out, and that's why it's like the circle of life. And so the smallest little particles, viruses, virins, and infectious particles are one of the things that can annihilate humans. Of course, climate change and everything else is going to have an impact on it, but that will also just help us destroy each other because famine will occur long before then, before the and we'll destroy ourselves long before the temperature of the earth will. But I diverge a little bit. The point is that these things, viruses are always mutating. They're flying. They're always finding a way to survive in a different host. It might have initially been seen in a bird or a cow or pigs or something like that, but they have a remarkable ability to be able to evolve a lot faster than humans have an ability to evolve because their genetic material is much less complicated. And the goal of any species or any organism is to survive. And so, if it can no longer survive in a cow, or if it finds that it develops a mutation that allows it to survive in a human a little bit more readily, then it will do that. And once a human gets infected with it, they start, if it's infectious or communicable, they spread it to other humans. And unless you close off the borders to the United States to any type of traffic coming from any other country, we are subject to receiving or getting infected by some of these viruses in other countries. And guess what? The World Health Organization is under no obligation to let us know, hey, there was an outbreak over here. This is what we know about it. Imagine what would have happened if China didn't change. And I know there's a lot of criticism about, how forthcoming they were about COVID-19. But if they didn't share with us the DNA sequences for the virus, we would have been so far behind the eight ball. And so, if the World Health Organization isn't helping to coordinate our responses to these outbreaks, I think we're at a huge disadvantage, and we're going to wind up destroying ourselves just because there's a whole lot of people who say, "I don't trust scientists anymore. I don't trust the vaccine. I'm not going to get a vaccine." And because we have free speech, all of that information spreads like wildfire, and we're set up for self destruction. I
I
hate
mean,
to be
and
pessimistic
all
like that,
right, free speech and there's no fact checking. You know,
but thanks, Mark Zuckerberg.
he also reduced funding for scientists that were studying infectious diseases. So between that and we got the Paris Agreement that was dealing with climate change, he's reduced the funding in the environmental space. I mean, to your point, like not only are we getting rid of the scientists, but we're also letting nature run free with no checks, and we're reducing any checks as well as funding for some of these organizations as well as some of these personnel that were studying and keeping us informed.
God help the smelt.
Well, I don't
God help the smelt. The smelt won't survive, because Donald Trump wants to now actually. Donald Trump wants to make sure that Governor Newsom opens the water from the north to let it down before he gets any federal aid. And the poor smelt, which are in danger right now, they're gonna die. And so God help the smelt. Help us as well.
which
If
I
he
know a
doesn't care
lot of
about the smelt, he doesn't care about us either.
no, I've been saying because I know a lot of people don't have as much sympathy for what's going on in LA because it's happening a lot with Hollywood per se, but it is extremely sad. I know he went down to California, went down to LA, and met with Governor Newsom, which I think to some degree Governor Newsom, I mean, and not knocking him because he had to some degree, but he started kissing the ring and said, "Hey, we need you, please help us." Whereas I feel like Donald Trump initially was saying, "Hey, I'm not giving them any money until they do X." And now I think he's also kind of changed his tune a little. Maybe someone finally said, "This really could hurt us. I need you to do this." But he wants to reduce funding for FEMA. And we saw with the hurricanes, because he went down North Carolina too. He's still very critical of FEMA. But he is also still very critical of disseminating aid.
You know,
So I mean, it's
so
like not only are we not going to have preventative measures, we're not going to have the scientists, and then when it happens, we're not going to have the aid to get out of it. Like we're in a lose lose right now.
what's gonna happen? It's gonna catch us all by surprise. and it's going to be so devastating that we don't even have to worry anything. We just sit back and just let it all happen. And then we'll look back and say, thanks, Donald. But I don't know. I was listening to some of the arguments about FEMA, and I heard one of Trump's supporters make a comment. He said, she said, I think it's at least worth an exploration to find out, is there a better way to be able to coordinate these efforts? Now, he's just right now talking about getting rid of FEMA. And and Trump likes to stir up a whole bunch of things because he likes to still be in the media and like to be talked about.
But
Like
as we can see with
today,
these
he got our
executive
whole
orders,
show.
he will do
Huh?
it. I bet say, but again, we also see with these executive orders, he will do it. I don't want people to think, oh, he's just talk. No, no, no.
That's true. That's true.
He's
He'll
not
do
just
it,
talk.
and he'll do it without thinking about it or the consequences thereof.
Right.
But maybe there is a way to have a conversation to say, is there a better way to be able to get money to the states? And unfortunately, my belief is this: if the state's controlled by a Republican legislature, and a Republican governor, they will designate funds to go to certain areas that are, in favor for their districts as opposed to the other ones. um, and the aid will go along congressional lines, I would suspect. So I don't know that I would trust necessarily the states to handle things. The federal government is probably a little bit less political, maybe not if there is such a thing like that in terms of dissemination of aid.
Have you seen this last election? But okay, go ahead.
I,
Were you here?
I'd like to think that the federal government has an emphasis on making sure that every United States citizen is getting equal protection and equal access. That's the goal of the federal government as opposed to some of the states, because the states can say, hey, you're a US citizen. I don't think you're entitled to this, right? And so we're going to get rid of it for everybody who's in our state. Well, the federal government has to say, okay, wait a minute, this is violating that person's rights. And if so, what can we do about it? So I don't know. I would think that the federal government should be a little less partial than some of the state governments, especially in contested elections and
Well,
where
it's kind of like the healthcare thing. Until you have a better plan, you don't go wipe out a plan that's at least addressing a
that's
need.
true. That's true.
And so, but even to me, one of the problems both have is their need to reduce funding. And a lot of times, what states do is they'll say, oh, okay, we'll reduce funding here and just rely on the federal government to fill in that gap. Well, if both of you guys are reducing funding, then that gap doesn't get filled. And I think that's what happened with FEMA. I think a lot of state governments probably don't have enough emergency financial or emergency budgeted to handle these events that again are new. I mean, what was happening with the fire, a lot of people try to criticize some of these local officials, and I'm not saying they're completely without blame, but we do have to acknowledge this is also something new. I
Yeah.
think the same thing you can be said with the hurricanes. I mean, again, you can criticize North Carolina or even Georgia or whatever, but then we also have to recognize, man, this was also something new. And so it's hard to budget what you haven't experienced. And so, a lot of these states are relying on the federal government to help. But if you have a Trump who is wanting to reduce FEMA, reduce Social Security, reduce even the ability to have health care, then there becomes no avenue to help you.
Part of the animus toward FEMA at this point, or at least that Trump is trying to fuel, is he said that he gave all the FEMA money to the immigrants, to the illegal immigrants who were
Fake
displaced
news.
during some of the
Fake
natural. You know,
news.
the reality of it is that there were two separate pots of money that Congress allocated. One was for the residents, the citizens in those states, but then they also said, we've got all these displaced migrants, many of whom are illegal. Well, what do? You just say, well, we're just going to leave you out to hang you, let you hang to dry. You do that, you invite crime and more violent crime. If people are in your country, in your state, whether they were born there or whether they migrated there, if they become destitute, then what happens is they resort to crime. Um, and if you want to keep crime down, then you have to make sure that certain social services are available to everybody in your state, in your country, or whatever it is. And so anybody who has that whole notion about they were giving FEMA money to taking it away from U.S. citizens and giving it to immigrants, that's false. And so just wanted to put that out there before we concluded today.
Which we also, of course, addressed when we even got to how we got to the cats and dogs thing. How, again, that originated with the governor of Ohio asking J.D. Vance, who was the senator of that district at the time, hey, we need funding to help with the economic growth that is happening here. Not, hey, we need you to reduce funding so that we can kick these people out. Again, but you read what you want to read into that, and unfortunately, I'd imagine, because again, as we've reported, a lot of the immigrants that were in Ohio has since left because of their own security and safety, and I'd imagine a lot of the residents of Ohio are going to feel it because again, that decreased their economic growth.
Amen.
We're gonna have to pick this up because I mean he signed what almost 200. I think we maybe be gotten.
We got
Yeah,
about eight.
yeah, right. And I don't doubt that there is more forthcoming because again, we can also talk about some of these appointments that he's gotten through, and a lot of the controversies over there. I'm sure once RFK comes up, that may just be a topic for, for an entire episode. But go ahead and start storing water, right? He's removing the fluoride. But do let us know if there is a specific executive order that you guys would like us to dive into and address. And by diving into, just talking about some of the consequences as well as the content. And if there is any other topics that you guys want us to address, because, you know, if we talk about Trump and everything, this might be a sad podcast for the next 4 years. So we want to we want to give you a glimmer of hope, or at least a reminder that, hey, God still is in control. This world was never meant to be paradise. And to some degree, it's just time to make preparations for an inevitable need. And there's even hope in that. So until next time, which you know we are here at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. You can also catch us on your favorite podcast platform. You can catch a repeat of this episode on Star Radio. And you can also go and subscribe to us on YouTube and catch some of the episodes there. So until then, thank you guys so much and have a blessed week.